While we were here celebrating our 11th anniversary yesterday, there was a mass murder taking place in El Paso, Texas. And though armed security guards and police were in the area, only took them 6 minutes to stop the shooter. Still, in 6 minutes, this young man was able to shoot nearly 50 people. He killed 20 of them because of the kind of military-style weapons that are still readily available to the public. While we slept last night, another mass shooting took place in an entertainment area of Dayton, Ohio. This time, the police were able to shoot and kill the shooter in 1 minute. And yet, in 1 minute, this kid was able to kill 9 people and injure 16. Again, armed with readily available weapons that were designed for the battlefield. This continues to happen in our country because of the inability of our legislature to pass meaningful gun reform laws that have been proven to work in almost every other Western nation in the world. Only the American government can be bought by the gun lobby to such a degree that not one single sane measure has been allowed to be voted on and put in place. There are people in Washington, D.C. who are more responsible than others, but hating on them does little good if the general public has become inured to this kind of carnage so that it sparks outrage in the media for a few days and then is immediately forgotten. And as far as total gun deaths are involved, mass murders account for only a fraction of the total gun deaths in America, where many Western nations have fewer than 100 gun deaths a year, and some have less than 10. Japan averages 7. We continue to have more than 30,000 deaths by gun violence every year, and 100,000 are shot who do not die. Now, about half of these are suicides. There are about 9,000 homicides, but there are more than 500 domestic violence deaths every year where a spouse shoots a spouse. And about 1,000 every year are police shootings. And it's estimated that 8 out of 10 of those were unnecessary. So we have several unrelated types of gun deaths every year. Suicides are the largest, then homicides, then police killings, then domestic violence, and only then mass murders, the ones that we talk about. As Paul Tomlinson said earlier this weekend, every action is overdetermined. Just because a mass shooter has posted a racist manifesto does not mean that racial hatred was the only or even the primary cause. The shooter may have had dozens of causes. They may have been very angry or profoundly depressed or hurt or rejected in some other way, and they looked for a reason, an excuse, to scratch that psychological itch through committing a very violent act. Suicide by gun is typically a successful act, though it's not always, and you should know this. You check in any VA hospital that has a neuro ward, and I was chaplain for a year in a neurosurgery ward in a VA hospital. We always had 3 or 4 patients on our floor who had shot themselves in the head and not died, missing parts of their face and parts of their skull. So even that doesn't always work. But most suicide attempts through cutting or taking pills or gassing yourself in the garage, most of those are not successful suicides. Most gun-related suicides are successful. Still, what I find to be amazing is that families in which there is someone who is suicidal will still keep weapons in the house. If someone who is sufficiently depressed to be receiving treatment for taking medications, why is there a gun in the house? For that matter, if there are children that live in your house, why is there a gun in your house? If there is someone who has impulse control in your house, someone who's abusing drugs, someone who abuses alcohol, someone who is on the autism spectrum, someone who has a head injury. Why is there a gun in your house? You see, when it comes to solving the problem with gun violence in America, there is not one simple answer. Now, the low-hanging fruit, admittedly, are the assault rifles and semiotic weapons, all sorts that are on our streets and in our stores. But that only addresses the smallest number of challenges we face. It should be the easiest, and we should get it done. I have a bumper sticker on my car that's a variation of the grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, because I don't believe that anymore. Grant me the serenity to change the things I cannot accept. I cannot accept 30,000 gun deaths a year. I cannot accept that someone with an IQ that doesn't reach the average range can walk into Bass Pro and buy a semi-automatic rifle and an unlimited number of bullets. That is unacceptable, and we need to talk about it and talk about it until we can change it. But past that, we need to address handguns that are used in most domestic violence, most homicides, and almost all suicides. Handguns are used to shoot people. They were invented to shoot people. That is what they are for. You don't need a handgun to hunt. You don't need a handgun to protect your home. You only need a handgun to shoot people. Do I have to tell you that you shouldn't shoot people? Handguns should be restricted to police and members of the military, and even then, training and screening needs to be much more rigorous. The police need to find a lot of other options before they pull out their revolver. But in all of these matters, the number one causative agent is the relative indifference and the short attention span of the American public. The best known practices that have brought down gun deaths all over the world must be enacted in America by patriotic Americans. And because we're a church, I want to say this, because I know we have hundreds of pastors who listen in to our podcasts and videos. I want to say something to you that, forgive me if I sound condescending, but stop delivering sermons about magic and superstition and wishful thinking. For God's sake, stop giving sermons that are history lessons about way back when on a continent far, far away. That crap is a distraction from what is actually facing an American civilization that is currently on fire. Don't ever deliver another sermon about the Hebrew translation or the Greek root of some word in the Bible when what is happening here and now is costing tens of thousands of lives. If pastors would only speak openly and honestly about gun ownership and the sacred nature of life itself, we could get gun laws passed. If all you have is a pulpit, then you damn well better use your pulpit. Anything else makes you complicit in mass murder.
So I'm going to be repeating just a bit of what Roger said this morning, but it bears repeating. The theme of our conference over the weekend has been the importance of connection, of community, how to build it, how to sustain it. And yet, while we were listening to lectures and participating in panels devoted to this topic, a domestic terrorist devoted to white supremacy waged war on community, killing 20 and injuring 26 at an El Paso Walmart. And this morning, we woke up to the news of another mass shooting, 9 dead and 26 injured in Dayton, Ohio. In this case, the shooter was killed by officers in less than a minute, but the fact remains and has always been that high-capacity firearms need only seconds to cause irreparable harm. So now we're faced again in what has become a nightmarish cycle with the task of communal response to the deaths of Americans in our gun violence epidemic. How do we reassert the fact that we belong to one another after a white supremacist with the self-proclaimed goal of shooting as many Mexicans as possible attacks a community that is nearly 80% Hispanic? What do we do about the fact that bulletproof backpacks are now in such mainstream back-to-school shopping spots as Office Depot, and that reunification centers have entered our national vocabulary? Reunification centers, the place you go to hopefully find your loved one who has just experienced the trauma of a mass shooting, but who has hopefully survived it. Here's what we do, based on what I've learned this weekend at our Vital Connections conference. First, we find ways to sustain both ourselves and others because we have a lot of work to do that at times will be dispiriting and exhausting. One thing that the good people in this particular room will be doing in the next 5 minutes is to participate in communion together, not in any expectation of wine becoming the blood of Christ or bread becoming his body, but to assert the fact that when we welcome, commune with, and take care of the stranger on the most basic level by sharing food and drink, our eyes are open to what is divine. This is what the Road to Emmaus story means. 2, we find, nurture, and use our voices. Thank you, Harry and Sean, for taking us through voice exercises yesterday, because we will be speaking and singing our message, Gun Control Now, until we hopefully don't need to do it anymore. 3, and finally, we remember what we learned from Paul in yesterday's lecture about social media, that we can use it as a way to understand our cultural moment. And here's what I see as someone who has been advocating for gun control on social media since Sandy Hook. While I am still connected on Facebook to lifetime NRA members, I am from South Carolina after all, there has been a sharp decline in those who boast about it. Because here's the truth. It's hard for people to admit when they're wrong, despite the fact that all of us, except maybe Roger, have been. But as culture shifts, what was once a bragging point has become something better left unsaid. It is, as Martin Luther King Jr. promised us, the way that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. So we're going to keep on loving our neighbor, welcoming the stranger, and reclaiming our public spaces by getting weapons of war off our streets. And anyone who tries to stop us may as well just stand aside, because we've just attended a conference that's taught us how to stay both unified and energized.
Thank you, Nicole.